a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 141 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this pleasant, sunny Thursday afternoon in New York. I just can't believe it's not raining and miserable. Maybe the weather's taking a turn for the better. Wouldn't count on it. It's still April. But if you're catching this episode on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content but haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. So today we'll have the 12th entry in our continuing series on the most underrated film performances. The movie today and the actor, it's difficult to separate one from the other for reasons I'll get into. Today's the 27th anniversary of the release date of Philip Noyce's a kind of spy thriller, but it's not really a spy thriller. The main character seems to be a spy, but he's more like a thief, but he does spy skullduggery. The movie is The Saint. The actor is Val Kilmer. And his turn as Simon Templar in the 1997 spy thriller, The Saint, is my 12th entry in the ongoing series, Most Underrated Film Performances. Now, Val Kilmer, unfortunately, is a bit of a tragic figure now due to the terrible health issues which laid him low at not very old. He started having issues with his throat, and I think he first came up positive for having cancer. I want to say he was still in his 40s, and it really kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't as if he always had trouble speaking or issues with nodules on his voice box or anything. It really seemed to come out of nowhere. Val Kilmer is a quintessential Generation X star, and he's somebody who will always have a special place in the heart of, I can't even tell you how many Gen Xers who would put him above Tom Cruise in their, favorites list and all this kind of stuff. And even elder millennials, people now in their late 30s and early 40s who perhaps grew up watching movies like Willow. The Saint is not that good of a movie, if I'm being honest. And I love debating stuff like what constitutes a good movie. It was successful at the box office. 27 years ago, it turned $170 million worldwide gross, which would be okay for today. But you start doing the math and extrapolate out, it was a hit. It didn't get good reviews, and I understand why, because it doesn't seem to do as much with the concept as it could. But what it has is a great star in a quintessential movie star performance. This is not something that can be taught. I've talked about it with guys like Robert Redford in The Natural. It is a quintessential movie star performance, and it is a classic 90s kind of film, from the choice of soundtrack music to the styles of clothing and hair. And it's amazing star, Val Kilmer. And there are younger people, certainly if you're under 30 and a movie fan, you at least know who he is. You saw him, a shell of his former self, sadly and almost literally, in Top Gun Maverick. But when people are curious, and this is the kind of topics, these are the kinds of topics I love to talk about, because you could get into a really heated and vicious debate, but it's all fun. If you ask the question, how did Tom Cruise become Tom Cruise? What is the key film to watch if you're somebody who knows who he is and has only seen Top Gun Maverick and is wondering, how does a guy like that become the biggest movie star in the world? How did Clint Eastwood become Clint Eastwood? How did Leonardo DiCaprio become DiCaprio? Or if you want to go further, pick one movie for an acting or show business legend, icon, to young people who only know that's a big name and my mom or my grandma is a fan. Julia Roberts, you show them Pretty Woman. That's how you do it. I know I'm not even a big Julia Roberts fan, but she's 22 years old And she literally steals the movie from, at the time, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, in Richard Gere. That's how you do it. And that's the movie that you point to. If somebody, for example, sees Leave the World Behind and says, I know the name Julia Roberts. I know I'm supposed to know who that is. Give me a Julia Roberts movie. I'm not going to give you Erin Brockovich. She won the Oscar, Pretty Woman, only because it shows how even a young woman could be oozing so much star power and so much charisma that she takes a movie that is not hers to take and she does it anyway. She walks away with it. Whole cloth. You ask me, okay, Clint Eastwood is in his 90s now. What's the one movie I need to see to understand why? Directing aside, why did Clint Eastwood become the #1 box office star in the world for how many years of his career? A lot. Dirty Harry. What's the movie that we will show when Brad Pitt takes the final lap and announces his retirement? It's going to be Fight Club. Invariably, that's the movie you'll point to say, here's why Brad Pitt was Brad Pitt. For Leonardo DiCaprio, that movie will be Catch Me If You Can. For Val Kilmer, the somewhat tragic figure, an extraordinary talent, the youngest person to ever make the dramatic acting program at Juilliard. If you understand how competitive Juilliard is, Val was 17. He was already writing and directing and acting in plays. This was not a normal, good-looking guy who got into acting. This was an extraordinarily talented young man who just happened to look like that. He just happened to look like an Abercrombie and Fitch model. You couldn't have a better combination of talent, looks, and natural charisma than Val Kilmer. And fortunately, he got to show it in enough movies where people like me, who grew up watching movies like Real Genius or Top Secret when we were kids, can say, he didn't quite have the career that he should have, but he did enough. He did enough to be remembered as an all-timer. The Saint, despite not being a great movie, it is a great movie star turn from Val. And some of the things that he did so beautifully throughout his career, they're all on display in this one movie. Because Simon Templar, he's like Fletch, if you want to go with another 80s movie. He's somebody that can play different characters within the same film. You look at his movies, aside from The Saint, and Val has the ability to completely become the character. Whether it's Doc Holliday in Tombstone, whether it's Ice in Maverick and then Top Gun Maverick as the older guy, whether it's Jim Morrison in The Doors, he fucking looked like Jim Morrison, and it's still an absolute movie crime that he wasn't nominated for Best Actor for The Doors. What fucking movie did the Academy members watch? How did he not get nominated? I understand that other people work hard. Val gave everything he had to the preparation for that role. It put a lot of strain on his marriage because he was working so many hours to try to get the sound just right. He was a perfectionist. But the way that he inhabits Doc Holliday, it doesn't feel like an actor playing a role. It feels like this is the guy. It didn't feel like Val playing Jim Morrison in The Doors. It felt like we were watching Jim Morrison, similar to Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman and Tony Clifton in Man on the Moon. We stop remembering that we're watching an actor and it feels like we're watching the real guy. In The Saint, Val gets to use every tool, every incredible skill set that he was blessed with and that he worked hard to continue to cultivate. He does it all in The Saint. From the movie star walk, the smile, the movement, the physicality. He had recently done Batman Forever. He didn't really get to do that much acting in that movie, even though it was a humongous hit. Again, dollar for dollar. 1995, Batman Forever, crazy worldwide box office gross. It would have probably made $1 billion today, inflation adjusted. He plays a number of different, it's not that he's playing different characters. I shouldn't say it that way. He uses various disguises at different points. And each time you see the gears turning that Val wants to make every one of these different disguises sing. that you don't know that it's him, that most of the characters can't tell that it's him, and that's the point. And a great Croatian actor, Rade Žerbija, who did a lot of movies in the 90s. He even had kind of a funny role with Tom Cruise in Eyes Wide Shut. He did a lot of big films in the 90s and then going forward. And he plays the nominal villain in this film, a guy named Tretiak. To give you an idea what Tretiak is, Putin would be the good guy in Russia. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how horrendous Tretiak would be. Like, he's running for president or premier of Russia. And he's so horrendous. You'll be like, boy, we need a good guy like Vladdy in there compared to this piece of shit. But there's a sequence in the film where Val dresses up like him. And if you close your eyes and listen to Val deliver his lines, you will not be able to tell who is who. And it's funny, and he makes jokes about the problem with trying to pretend I'm you is pretending to be so bad in bed. And it's fucking hilarious. I was not familiar with the character of the Saint or Simon Templar going into this film. I knew that Roger Moore had played a different iteration, but the same character on TV in a TV show called Simon Templar. But I didn't understand, because Val does a lot of things in certainly the first half of this movie where he appears to be out to enrich himself, not be a saint, not be someone who is attempting to amass enormous amounts of wealth to give it to the right people. And it's like the performance is so assured that you kind of he doesn't appear to be a guy with his heart in the right place, because there are moments where he takes advantage of vulnerable characters and you almost kind of lose the thread of what he's trying to do here. But it wouldn't be a movie, and Val wouldn't have done the movie if his character is a heel who steals hundreds of millions of dollars so that he can have a Harrier jet or some bullshit like that. So the movie uses practical effects and practical stunt work, which is strange to me for the time, because this is the era where Hollywood just started blowing shit up real good and using practical effects with CGI in movies like True Lies with Arnold and Last Action Hero with Arnold, Terminator 2 with Arnold, and Armageddon with Bruce, even Deep Impact, the kind of more wholesome, the meteors that come into Earth, the comets, and we're all going to die movie. But this film uses practical stunt work and fight sequences that feel real and grounded. And it's funny, you go on Rotten Tomatoes, and the Rotten Tomatoes score is absurdly low. It's 30%. And I remember watching Siskel and Ebert's review the week this film came out. It came out, as they say, right around the time of the 1997 Oscars. And neither one of them liked the movie. And one of the problems Roger in particular had was it seemed that he was expecting a different film. And he was disappointed because to him, they didn't do enough with the fight scenes, that they could have done more to make them more exciting or different or whatever. And yet, ironically, 3 years later, in the second Mission Impossible film, you're expecting more pyrotechnics, and a big fight scene between Doug Ray Scott and Tom Cruise is pretty much just two well-trained guys beating the shit out of each other without any wire work or anything like that. They're just going at it. And there are scenes in The Saint where Val's character, the fights feel real. And I guess some people were expecting different, or they were expecting some kind of crazy special effects or stunt work within the context of the regular fight scenes. But there's a lot of stuff in this movie that, if we're being honest, can't happen. But Val's character experiences real suffering and real pain within the confines of what appears to be a spy thriller, more so than you'll get in most James Bond films until Casino Royale, where how many different times does Daniel Craig either get electrocuted or shot? You know, like Ghostbusters 2, he's poisoned, shot, stabbed, hung, disemboweled, stretched, drawn, and quartered. Daniel Craig in Casino Royale, pretty much all of that happens to him at various points, but he's like the Energizer Bunny. But there's an extended scene in The Saint where Simon, Val's character, he stages an unbelievable escape where he submerges himself in water that would probably kill you in 30 seconds. And it's not the kind of scene you expect in this sort of movie, same way what I'm saying about the fight sequences, you wouldn't expect this scene, and then you wouldn't expect to see the actor apparently in real agonies. I feel like Val, being a method actor, probably wanted to push to the limit of, hey, if I die, it's okay, I died for my art. He wouldn't have said that, but something in that ballpark. But that's more believable than you would expect from an action movie in that decade. Now, the female lead in the film, as Val is just throwing star power, he's just spraying it all over the screen, if you'll pardon the expression. But there are certain moments and movies, Brad Pitt in Fight Club, as I said, Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry. And those happen to be better movies than The Saint. But Val Kilmer is just giving off star power, and he's giving off movie star charisma in waves for the entire film. He can't help it. He's just one of those, and was one of those special people in Hollywood. The smile, the glance, where the audience is with him just because it's him. Just because it's Val. It's prime Val. And Elizabeth Shue is an actress that I hate to say up and down relationship, because I've never met her. But she's somebody who in the right role can be great, but I feel like she's a little bit miscast in this film. And it's part of the reason why the score with the critics, and why a lot of critics also just were kind of lukewarm on the film. She plays a sort of brilliant biophysicist and scientist, kind of like I hate to say Oppenheimer or Einstein, but she's working on cold fusion level stuff. And I never buy her in this part. I don't believe the way she's presented, it doesn't work for me. But you feel the kind of conflict, because she feels a connection with Simon, and he does a couple of really shady things. And then you ask yourself, well, would this really be how this kind of a person with this level of IQ and schooling and all that, would she really behave this way? Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. Certainly when she realizes his heart is in the right place, all of that. The film is very well acted, and there are a number of interesting supporting performances from actors most of us won't be familiar with. The villain, his sons, one actor in particular who carries a walking stick. I don't know his name, but he gives a great mustache-twirling villain, almost a sort of an angry villain, as opposed to the sneering, snarling, smiling, Jack Nicholson in the Joker kind of a villain. I don't think the movie was shot on location in, the Eastern European countries. There may be some second unit shots and pickups and whatnot, but I feel like the film was probably shot on sound stages and locations that were dressed up to look like Eastern Europe. But it feels like it was shot where it's set. And it's not something that necessarily is in your head when you're watching a movie. Occasionally you're taken out of the fiction where, now wait a minute, we're supposed to be in the Bronx. This is Brooklyn, where something like that happens. Or you feel very clearly that you're on a soundstage. Dirty Harry used almost exclusively San Francisco, a real life, 1971 San Francisco locations, except the bank robbery shootout, which would have been too difficult to stage in downtown San Francisco. So they shot it on the Warner Brothers lot. They redressed it a little bit to resemble what probably was kind of like San Francisco. But that's a studio shot. This movie always feels real as far as the locations. It doesn't feel like they're stage bound or on a set or on a sound stage. And this is something, again, that if you're not that big of a movie fan, you're not even going to probably figure out, you're not going to see what I'm saying. It isn't something that's going to resonate with you. But for somebody like me, I appreciate when they give the filmmakers enough money where they can make it believable. Even if they're not literally shooting this in St. Petersburg, Russia. They might be shooting it somewhere in the United States, but it feels right. They get the fact that everybody's freezing to death. They get that right. The people are starving in the streets. They get that right. And whether that's in Missouri or whether that's in St. Petersburg, Russia, it's believable. Now, the filmmaker, Philip Noyce, did a very well-regarded, it didn't make that much money, but he did a thriller in the late 80s called Dead Calm. And it was an early role for Nicole Kidman. Sam Neill was on his way up, and Billy Zane, who plays Cal Hockley in Titanic, among other, other roles. He's a very talented filmmaker. And sometimes you'll have a filmmaker who is almost better than the material. And it's a challenge to them, presumably, to try to make things more interesting or make things interesting even in the first place if the material is kind of beneath them. And in this, you sense him trying to be as creative as he can, because this script is okay, but it's not nearly, it could be like The Bourne Identity, that sort of story, because it's taking place in European locations. He doesn't really get to flex his directorial muscle, Noyce, the way that he did, for example, Clear and Present Danger, the Jack Ryan story starring Morgan Freeman and Ben Affleck. I think his direction in that film, because he had a massive budget, phenomenal. And he's done other movies like Rabbit Proof Fence, Catch a Fire with Tim Robbins and Derek Liu, movies where you just see this guy's got a great eye and tremendous talent. And sometimes you don't have the best script, but it's beautifully directed nevertheless. Quiet American with Michael Caine. Most underrated, brilliant Michael Caine performance. The Quiet American, write that down. Brendan Fraser, fantastic. That's one of the better movies of the early 2000s. I want to say it was 2003, something like that. But it was a Michael Caine Oscar-nominated performance, and he is fantastic. That's a great movie. That's a kind of underrated movie people have slept on. I might have to do an episode on that one. But Val, in this film, throughout the story, he's compelling in every scene. So we never know which guys he's going to be in. We never know what he's going to do within scenes, because he is a conniver. He is a master manipulator. But ultimately, his character is a saint. He has the giving, kind heart. He is a compassionate person. And it's something, like I said, watching the movie the first time, it wasn't clicking in my head why the movie was called The Saint. Character seemed like a scumbag to me. And I was into the story, and I've seen this film at least 5 times from start to finish. Oh, before I forget, it's streaming on Max for free. So if you get that channel, you don't have to rent it or anything. You can just, turn it on and check it out, see if I know what I'm talking about. Maybe I don't. Maybe you'll watch the movie and say, not only does this suck, Val Kilmer sucks in this movie, and Val Kilmer sucks, period. Highly doubtful you'll draw that conclusion. I want to also point out, though, in addition to what Val is able to do in this film, I watched the documentary Val on Amazon Prime, which is about his life and career. And the levels of tragedy that he absorbed as a younger person. His brother passed very young in a terrible accident. And it informed a lot of his life and how he approached things. And he did have a reputation for being a perfectionist. I'll be nice and we'll say a perfectionist. But there were certain films, like The Island of Dr. Moreau, with David Thewlis, Fairuza Balk, and Marlon Brando, where he ran afoul during the production of the filmmaker. And that was a story. We had a filmmaker named Richard Stanley, and this was actually the movie that he made before The Saint, The Island of Dr. Moreau. Man, Val worked so much. I'm just thinking about it. So he did Batman Forever, which was a very difficult and taxing production, came out in 95. The Island of Dr. Moreau was a complete disaster. It took forever to get through. Everybody was fucking miserable from Brando on down. And Val almost got into a fight with the replacement director, old school, a fantastic filmmaker who Val just didn't like, John Frankenheimer. And I've talked about him on the channel multiple times. I hate to say that Val caused trouble on that set, but in the Val documentary, he kind of implies I didn't handle that as well as I should have. The studio made their call, and I should have abided by it, but he had difficulty. He was hoping to bond with Brando. It didn't happen. Everyone was in the jungle. They were hot. They were miserable. They're getting dengue fever. Whoever knows what was going on out there. But Val made The Ghost in the Darkness, which sucked, unfortunately. It was a great script. The movie's terrible. I love Michael Douglas. Not good. Island of Dr. Moreau, disaster. And The Saint, although made money, got shitty reviews. So he had, after this huge success of Batman Forever, his next 3 films, disaster, made money but was not well received. It's the way it goes in the movie business. But Val was never less than compelling in those roles. He plays the lead in The Ghost in the Darkness. He gives it what he's got. That was a true story. Like, that's the kind of thing. And this is when people say in Hollywood that nobody knows anything. The Ghost in the Darkness, I would call it, I think it's a good movie. It's not great, but it's a great true story which had a big budget and was cast with great actors in Val and Michael Douglas. And it got the time period right. The movie should work, but it doesn't. To the level that should have been a great movie. The pieces were in place and it never really takes off. The Val we see in the documentary when he started to feel symptoms, when he started to get sick. And it's not like what happened with the late great film critic Roger Ebert, who developed mouth and jaw cancer and lost the ability to speak and never got it back. From what we understand, Val should have a lot of years left. He's not dying. He's 64 years old now, but he probably will never speak in a normal way again. And it is sad. And even though I'll never meet him in all likelihood, most of us will never be, around him unless we go to an autograph show if he happens to do, because he used to do this. I don't think he really does them anymore. But we still feel bad. And it is when you see someone who you grew up watching, so he's, 13, 14, 15 years older than me, but I grew up watching this guy. And it hurts to see them a shell of their former self, of course. But when we remember what they were, and remembering Val from, of course, Top Gun, but specifically his appearance, his presentation, his movie star charisma in The Saint. I'm sorry I get a little misty. It's not that it's upsetting, but you remember what someone was. Almost as we might remember a certain time in our lives that was either great or terrible or landscape altering, and we kind of get a little misty. This is the performance that I first think of when I think of Val Kilmer, not Tombstone. See, my problem with Tombstone is it's not that good. I think Tombstone is massively overrated. Lawrence Kasdan's Wyatt Earp, starring Kevin Costner, and Dennis Quaid as Doc Holliday, for me, is a better movie, even though it's an hour longer. It tells the same story. It just goes from a different angle. It's more of a war Western epic as opposed to just an action film using the Earp brothers as its centerpiece and Doc Holliday, and Val stealing every scene he's in. Fight's not with you, Holliday. Oh, I beg to differ, sir. And Val's most iconic line, I'm your Huckleberry. I'm your Huckleberry. Some of you, I would say probably at least half of you will have seen The Saint, but for those who haven't, I strongly suggest you check it out. If you're not familiar with Val, if he's just the old guy who can't speak in Top Gun Maverick, watch The Saint. And if I'm wrong, light me up in the comments. Tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm very confident on this, that those who only know the name and only know him for Top Gun Maverick, maybe they know him a little bit for the original Top Gun because you could have easily seen that movie although I know a lot of people who never saw the original Top Gun and have seen Top Gun Maverick 5 times. I don't need to see the original. Okay. But for those who only know from Top Gun Maverick, haven't even seen Tombstone, watch The Saint. Watch a different era movie star move through space knowing he's the star, and especially the kind of halo effect because his character is the saint. None of this is an accident. Watch the way he moves through space, the way that he engages with the other characters, and never stops acting like the star he knows he is. And it works for the character because Simon Templar deep down knows what he's doing is the right thing. And Val carries it off from first to last. Whether it's in a voiceover, whether it's in a change of vocal inflection, whether it's in a love note, he nails it, even though the movie is not altogether successful. It's not as bad as the fucking critics, I don't know what the hell, they're 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. There's pieces of shit that are in the 60s. This movie is at least a good movie, even if it's not as good as The Bourne Identity or any of the big action thrillers of the 90s that I mentioned. Val Kilmer's career is probably over, unless some kind of miracle takes place. They were very lucky. Well, maybe luck is the wrong word. Tom Cruise, also a polarizing figure. Although the irony of Tom Cruise being a polarizing figure is I remember people in the years running up to Top Gun Maverick, how many people I knew saying, fucking asshole, I fucking hate Tom Cruise. I'm not watching any fucking movies with that piece of shit. And somehow Top Gun Maverick, biggest box office hit ever, or one of them, 1 million Oscar nominations. Somebody went to see that movie. It had to have been a lot of people who, fuck Tom Cruise, fucking douchebag, piece of shit. It's weird shit, right? Weird shit. Top Gun Maverick. Tom didn't want to make the movie without Val. And I never got the sense it was because of his medical condition, his health, but that Tom wanted him back because he wanted him back. And they were able to work the medical angle into the story in a way that was believable. And it works because the character of Iceman in Top Gun, as talented as he is, as brilliant of a pilot, he's a guy who knows how to play the game. And he'll play ball with his superiors, unlike Maverick, aka Pete Mitchell, who from first to last is going like this to his superiors. If he wants to fly the fucking bird, he's going to do it, whether or not he has permission. Iceman would never do that. But I digress. The 12th entry in our continuing series, Most Underrated Film Performances. Val Kilmer as Simon Templar, aka the Saint, in Philip Noyce's 1997 spy thriller, released on this day 27 years ago. This has been episode 141 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on this Thursday afternoon in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content but haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 142 real soon. Until then,